Lyric stared at the thick, cream-colored envelope on the scarred diner table, her brain doing that thing it does when it receives information it doesn't quite have a category for yet. Because this man, this powerful, sharp-featured Korean man in a suit that probably cost more than the diner itself, was standing in her station, his intense gaze locked onto hers as he offered a lifeline she never saw coming. Behind her, Tiana went very still. And finally, the shallow affection Tiana had always performed for her best friend curdled into a visible scowl of pure, bitter envy. If this story already has you hooked, then smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, because we bring you powerful stories of justice and unexpected protection just like this. And besties, let me remind you that you can get the full, uncut details of our story by clicking the link in the description and joining our waitlist. Don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, to understand why a mafia boss would step in to save a waitress, we have to go back to Lyric's childhood and the song she was forced to stop singing. Besties, let's get back to the story. The small, cramped apartment on 4th Street sat in a building that the city had forgotten, unless it was time to collect. It was a place of peeling wallpaper, thin blankets, and the constant, low hum of a heater that barely worked because the landlord did exactly what the law required and stopped precisely there, like a man who does the bare minimum and expects to be called a saint for it. Lyric had no memory of luxury, only the sharp, cold shape that not enough makes in a person's life. And the thing about growing up in a neighborhood where everyone was struggling was that it should have softened that shape. There were dozens of families all in the same boat, all one paycheck away from the curb, all carrying the same weight of being invisible to the world. You would think that kind of shared struggle would make people gentle with each other. You would think it would build a sisterhood. We are all fighting the same storm, so let us be kind. It didn't work that way. Not for Lyric, because Lyric was a dreamer, a girl with a voice that reached for the stars while her feet were stuck in the mud. And in a place where everyone is drowning, having a song in your heart was its own separate sentence. Especially when your best friend is the first one to try and pull you back down. The sun did not so much rise over Lyric Street, as it simply made the shadows a lighter shade of gray. When the alarm on her cracked phone buzzed at 5 in the morning, Lyric did not jump out of bed. She couldn't. Her body felt heavy, like she was carrying a backpack full of stones. She lay there for a second, listening to the familiar sounds of the old building, the pipes humming and a dog barking 2 floors down. She remembered her grandmother's hands, warm, wrinkled, and strong, guiding her small fingers over the keys. Music is the only thing they can't take from you. Lyric, her grandmother used to say. It's the gold you carry inside. But the piano was gone now. She had sold it 3 months ago just to keep the lights on for another few weeks. Selling it felt like losing a piece of her soul. But in this city, souls didn't pay the rent. Every time she looked at that empty corner, she felt a sharp pinch in her chest, a reminder of what she had sacrificed just to stay afloat. Lyric took a sip of her black coffee and looked at her reflection in the darkened window. She saw a woman with a soft, glowing face and tired eyes. She looked like someone who was waiting for a heavy storm to pass. But the clouds only seemed to get thicker. She moved to the mirror to pin back her natural hair and put on her white Waitress shirt. As she buttoned it up, she tried to hum a little tune her grandmother taught her, but the sound died in her throat. The silence in the apartment felt too big to fill. She grabbed her bag, took one last look at the red-inked bills on the table, and stepped out into the cold morning air. She had to get to work. She had to survive another day, even if the world felt like it was leaning hard against her. Tiana arrived at my door exactly 20 minutes late, which, for her, was practically early. She didn't knock so much as she announced her presence by leaning on the doorbell until the ringing became a headache. When I opened the door, she didn't say hello. Instead, she pushed past me, dropped her heavy designer bag on my clean kitchen table, and sighed like she was the one who had just spent all day working. "This place is so cozy," Tiana said, though the way she wrinkled her nose made cozy sound like a word for tiny and sad. She walked over to my fridge without asking and pulled out the expensive orange juice I had saved for breakfast. She poured herself a tall glass and took a sip, immediately making a face. "Is this the store brand?" "Honestly, Maya, You need to start treating yourself better. Your skin looked a little dull lately, probably because of all this sugar. I felt that familiar sting in my chest, the one I always ignored because we had been friends since middle school. Tiana had a way of making her insults sound like she was doing you a huge favor by pointing them out. She was the beautiful parasite who lived on my couch whenever she was between apartments and ate my food while telling me I should probably go on a diet. I had a long day, Tiana, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was hoping we could just watch a movie and relax. Tiana laughed, a sharp, tinkling sound that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, I can't stay long. I'm meeting some people at that new club downtown later. But I actually came over because I have a huge favor to ask. Well, it's not even a favor, really. It's more of an opportunity for you to help a friend. I knew this tone. It was the tone she used right before she asked for money or for me to drive her across the city at midnight. She leaned against my counter, her perfect manicure clicking against the glass. I saw that gorgeous navy blue dress in your closet last week. The one with the silk trim? I need it for tonight. My blue heels will look amazing with it. And since you're just staying in, you won't be using it anyway. That was my birthday gift from my mom, I whispered. I haven't even worn it yet. Tiana rolled her eyes and reached out to pat my cheek. Her hand felt cold. Exactly. If I wear it first, I can tell you if it fits weird or if the zipper sticks. I'm basically testing it for you. Plus, let's be real, Maya. You don't really have anywhere to wear a dress like that, do you? You're always so busy with whatever it is you do at that office. She didn't wait for my answer. She walked straight into my bedroom, as if she owned the walls and the floor beneath her feet. I followed her, watching as she yanked the dress off the hanger. She held it up against herself in the mirror, pouting her lips and turning side to side. She looked beautiful, and she knew it. She looked like someone who had never heard the word no in her entire life. I'll bring it back tomorrow, she lied. We both knew she wouldn't. We both knew it would come back with a coffee stain or a ripped seam, and she would tell me it was my fault for buying cheap fabric. As she headed for the door with my dress draped over her arm, she stopped and looked at my messy desk. You really should clean up, Maya. It's hard to breathe in here. With a final, fake smile, she was gone, leaving behind only the scent of her expensive perfume and the quiet ache of a room that felt emptier than before. The walk home felt much longer than usual. The sky had turned a heavy, bruised purple, and the air felt thick with the smell of a coming storm. Lyra kept her head down, her mind still buzzing from the sharp words Tiana had used earlier at the coffee shop. She just wanted to get inside, lock the door, and disappear into the quiet of her own room. She needed a place where she didn't have to be good enough for anyone else. As she reached the top of the stairs to her apartment, she saw it. A bright, neon yellow piece of paper was taped firmly to the dark wood of her front door. It fluttered in the wind like a warning flag. Lyric stopped. Her heart began to drum against her ribs. She didn't want to touch it, as if the paper itself might burn her skin. Slowly, she reached out and pulled it off the tape. The bold, black letters at the top seemed to jump off the page. Eviction notice. The words underneath were a blur of dates and dollar signs, but the message was clear. She had very little time to pay what she owed, or she would have to leave. The hallway suddenly felt very narrow, the walls leaning in as if they were trying to catch her. Lyric fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking so hard they clattered against the metal lock. When she finally got inside, she leaned back against the closed door and let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. The apartment was silent, but it didn't feel like a safe place anymore. It felt like a box that was being taken away. She looked at her small sofa and the wooden bookshelf she had painted herself. Everything she owned was here, but the yellow paper in her hand made it all feel temporary, like she was already a ghost in her own home. She had worked so many extra shifts at the diner, but it still wasn't enough to keep the world from pushing her out. Outside, the clouds finally broke. Rain began to lash against the window panes with a steady, angry rhythm. It wasn't a soft spring rain, it was cold and hard. Lyric sat on the floor, the eviction notice crumpled in her lap. She thought about Tiana, who was probably warm and safe, complaining about a sweater or a muffin. Then she looked at the dark corners of her living room. The world felt like it was shrinking. Every light in the city seemed to be dimming at once. Lyric put her head in her hands and listen to the storm. She had always been a fighter, but for the first time, she wasn't sure what she was supposed to do next. The rain kept falling, loud and uncaring, washing away the ground beneath her feet. The rain from a night before had turned into a thick, gray mist that hung over the city streets. I walked to my second job at the diner, my shoes soaking up the cold water from the sidewalk. The yellow notice was still sitting on my kitchen table, a silent monster waiting for me to come home. I had to work. I had to smile. I had to earn enough tips to make a miracle happen in 6 days. The diner was warm and smelled like burnt coffee and fried bacon. It was the kind of place where the windows were always a little foggy. I tied my apron tight and started wiping down the counter. That was when I saw him. He was sitting in the very last booth in the far corner, away from the door and the noise of the kitchen. He was an older man, dressed in a suit that looked way too expensive for a place that sold $3 pancakes. His hair was perfectly silver, and he sat with his back straight, like a king sitting on a throne made of red plastic. He wasn't looking at a menu. He wasn't looking at a phone. He was just watching. "That's Mr. O," the other waitress, Sarah, whispered as she passed me with a tray of dirty mugs. "He comes in every Tuesday. We call him the silent boss. He never says a word except to order black coffee. Just sits there and observes everyone like he's taking a test on us." I took a deep breath and grabbed the coffee pot. My hand was still a bit shaky from the stress of the morning, but I walked over to his booth. As I got closer, I felt a strange energy coming from him. It wasn't scary, but it was heavy. He had eyes that seemed to see right through the fake smile I was wearing. He looked like a man who knew exactly what it felt like to have the world closing in. "Good morning," I said, my voice sounding small in the quiet corner. "Would you like some coffee, sir?" Mr. O didn't nod or smile. He simply looked at me. His gaze moved to my hands, then to the tired shadows under my eyes, and finally back to my face. For a second, I felt like he could see the yellow eviction notice tucked away in my mind. He pushed his white ceramic mug toward me. I poured the steaming dark liquid, careful not to let a single drop splash onto the table. "Thank you," he said. His voice was deep and smooth, like a lone note on a piano. He didn't say anything else. He just went back to watching the room. He watched the construction workers laughing at the counter. He watched the tired mother trying to quiet her crying baby. Most of all, he seemed to be watching how I moved. Every time I cleared a plate or refilled a sugar jar, I could feel his eyes on me. It was strange, but his silence didn't feel lonely. It felt steady. In a world where Tiana never stopped talking and the landlords never stopped yelling, Mr. O was like a quiet island in a stormy sea. I went back to my work, feeling a tiny bit stronger. I didn't know who he was or why he watched us so closely, but for the first time in 24 hours, I didn't feel like I was completely invisible. The lunch rush was a whirlwind of clinking silverware and shouting orders. My feet felt like lead, and my head was spinning from the lack of sleep. I carried 3 heavy plates of burgers and fries, balancing them carefully as I moved through the crowded aisles. Every time the bell rang in the kitchen, my heart jumped. I just needed to get through this shift. I needed every penny of those tips. In the far corner, Mr. O sat in his usual spot. He was as still as a statue, his eyes calmly tracking the chaos of the room. Just having him there made the air feel a little less heavy. But that feeling didn't last long. The bell above the door chimed, and a familiar, high-pitched laugh cut through the noise of the diner. Tiana walked in with 2 of her friends. She wasn't wearing the navy blue dress she had taken, but she was carrying a bag that looked brand new. They slid into a booth right in the center of the room. I tried to look busy at the coffee station, but Tiana spotted me immediately. "Maya, over here!" she shouted, waving her hand as if we were at a party instead of my place of work. I walked over, my stomach tying itself into knots. "Hi, Tiana. What can I get for you guys?" Tiana didn't even look at the menu. She looked at my apron, which had a small mustard stain from a messy order earlier. "Yikes, Maya. This place is even grungier in the daylight. And that outfit, it's really not doing you any favors." Her friends giggled, covering their mouths with manicured hands. "I'm working, Tiana," I said softly, leaning in so the other customers wouldn't hear. "Do you want to order something?" "Don't be so grumpy," Tiana snapped, her voice getting louder. I actually came to tell you that I accidentally spilled red wine on that blue dress. It's probably ruined, but honestly, it was kind of an old-fashioned style anyway. I did you a favor by getting rid of it. My heart felt like it stopped. That dress was the last thing my mother had given me before she moved away. It was the only nice thing I owned. I felt a hot sting behind my eyes, but I swallowed hard. I couldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of her. And besides, Tiana continued, leaning back and looking around the room with a smirk. Maybe if you spent more time at a real job instead of pouring cheap coffee, you could afford a better one. It's embarrassing to see you like this. The diner went quiet. A few people at the counter turned to stare. I felt the heat rising in my neck and face. I wanted to scream or run into the kitchen and hide. But then my eyes drifted to the corner. Mr. O was watching. He wasn't looking at Tiana. He was looking at me. His expression was serious, almost expectant. I took a deep breath and straightened my back. I gripped my notepad tightly. If you're going to order food, Tiana, I have other customers to serve. People who actually respect my time. Tiana's face turned red. She wasn't used to me standing up for myself. She huffed and grabbed her bag. Fine, we're leaving anyway. This place smells like grease. As they marched out, I felt a single tear escape and roll down my cheek. I quickly wiped it away with the back of my hand. I didn't stop. I walked over to the next table, refilled a water glass, and smiled at an old couple. My hands were shaking, but I kept moving. I held on to my grace like it was a shield. I was breaking inside, but I wouldn't let the world see me shatter. The lunch rush was over, but the air in the diner still felt heavy. My heart was still hurting from Tiana's cruel words, and every time I looked at the empty space where she had sat, I felt a fresh wave of sadness. I kept moving, scrubbing the counters until they shined, trying to wash away the feeling of being small. The rain outside had stopped, but the sky was still a dark, bruised purple. Near the window, a new customer sat down. He was a large man with a loud voice and a neck that seemed too thick for his stained shirt. He hadn't been there long, but he was already complaining. First, his water wasn't cold enough. Then, his eggs were too runny. I apologized and brought him a new plate, trying my best to stay polite. Is this supposed to be service? The man barked, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. He grabbed my wrist as I tried to walk away. His grip was tight and sweaty. I'm talking to you, girl. Look at me when I'm complaining. I felt a jolt of fear go through me. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Please let go, sir, I whispered, my voice trembling. I can get the manager if you aren't happy. The man laughed, a mean sound that made my skin crawl. I don't want a manager. I want you to listen. He pulled my arm closer, and I stumbled, nearly dropping my tray. The other customers looked away, staring at their plates, too afraid to get involved. I felt completely alone. Then, the diner went silent. It wasn't the normal quiet of a room settling down. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a lightning strike. I looked toward the corner. Mr. O had stood up. He didn't run, and he didn't yell. He walked toward our table with a slow, steady pace that made the floorboards seem to hold their breath. He stopped just a foot away from the rude man. Mr. O was shorter and thinner, but he seemed to tower over everyone in the room. He didn't look at me. He looked directly at the man's hand, which was still gripping my wrist. Mr. O didn't say a word. He simply tilted his head, his eyes cold and sharp like pieces of broken glass. There was something terrifying about his stillness. It was the look of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to be dangerous. The large man looked up, ready to shout, but the words died in his throat. He looked into Mr. O's eyes and suddenly turned pale. It was as if he had just realized he was standing in front of a sleeping lion. His fingers loosened, and he yanked his hand away from my arm as if he had been burned. I was just leaving, the man muttered. He scrambled out of the booth, knocking over his water glass in his hurry to get to the door. He didn't look back. I stood there, rubbing my sore wrist, my breath coming in short gasps. Mr. O finally turned his gaze toward me. The coldness in his eyes disappeared, replaced by that same steady, calm look from before. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a clean linen handkerchief, and set it on the table next to me. Steady yourself, he said in his low, piano note voice. He didn't wait for me to thank him. He simply turned around and walked back to his booth, sitting down as if nothing had happened. The world rushed back in. The sound of the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant honking of cars. I picked up the handkerchief. It was soft and smelled like cedarwood. For the first time in a week, the storm inside me felt like it was finally starting to clear. Kwon sat in the corner of the dim room, his eyes fixed on Lyric. She was standing by the large window, looking out at the city lights, but her mind seemed to be miles away. He could see the way her shoulders slumped, a heavy weight pulling them down. It was a look he had seen before on people who were tired of fighting a battle they knew they couldn't win. To anyone else, she might have looked peaceful, but Kwon knew better. He saw the way her fingers gripped the edge of the wooden table until her knuckles turned white. He didn't need her to say a single word to understand what was happening. Lyric was about to lose everything. The bakery, the apartment, and the small life she had worked so hard to build were all slipping through her fingers like sand. He watched her take a shaky breath, her chest rising and falling in a jagged motion. She was trying to be brave, but the cracks were starting to show. The silence in the room felt like a thick fog, making it hard for him to breathe. Kwon thought about his own life and the choices he had made. He had always been a man who watched from the sidelines, careful not to get too involved in other people as problems. But watching Lyric now, he felt a sharp tug in his heart. It wasn't fair. She had a heart of gold and had spent her whole life helping others. Now that she was the one in trouble, there was no one left to stand by her side. As he watched her, a sudden stillness came over him. A decision began to form in his mind, as solid and cold as a piece of iron. He couldn't just sit there and watch her world crumble. He had the power to change things, even if it meant risking his own safety or the secrets he had kept for so long. He looked at the back of her head, at the stray hairs falling out of her messy bun, and he felt a wave of protectiveness wash over him. He didn't stand up or move toward her. He didn't offer a comforting hug or a list of promises. Instead, he simply watched her, his eyes narrowing as he planned his next move. The conversation was happening entirely in his head, a silent promise made to a woman who didn't even know he was looking. He would intervene. He would find a way to stop the banks and the lawyers from taking what was hers. Lyric finally turned around, her eyes red from holding back tears. She tried to give him a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Kwon nodded back, his face a mask of calm. He didn't tell her what he was planning. He didn't want to give her hope that might be snatched away later. But as he looked at her, he knew that his life had just changed forever. He was no longer just an observer. He was a participant. The silent decision was made, and there was no turning back now. He would be the shield she didn't know she had. The grand hall was filled with the sound of clinking glasses and soft music, but the air felt heavy with a secret. The boss stood at the front of the room, his face as still as a statue. He held a small, wooden box in his hands. It didn't look like much, but everyone in the room knew that whatever was inside would change everything. Tiana stood in the front row, her chin held high in a wide, confident smile on her face. She smoothed down her silk dress, already acting like the winner she was sure she would be. She looked around at the other girls with a look of pity, as if she had already won the prize. The boss cleared his throat, and the room went silent. He didn't look at Tiana. Instead, his eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Lyric, who was standing near the back, trying to blend into the shadows. A debt is a serious thing, the boss said, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. But loyalty is even more important. Today, I am settling a debt that has stayed open for too long. He opened the box and pulled out a golden key. It sparkled under the bright chandeliers, catching the light like a small star. Tiana took a step forward, her hand already reaching out. She thought the key was for the new penthouse, or perhaps the keys to the company. But the boss walked right past her. He didn't even blink as he moved toward the back of the room. The silence became even deeper, so quiet that you could hear the heartbeat of the person next to you. He stopped right in front of Lyric and held out the key. "This is yours," he said softly. "The bakery is paid for. The land is yours. You owe nothing to anyone ever again." For a second, the world seemed to stop. Then, a sharp, jagged scream broke the silence. Tiana had turned around, her face twisting into something unrecognizable. The calm, beautiful girl from a moment ago was gone. Her face turned a bright, angry red, and her eyes were wide with shock. "No," she yelled, her voice cracking. "That was supposed to be mine. I did everything you asked. I followed every rule. How could you choose her?" She began to pace back and forth, her heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. People started to whisper and move away from her, but she didn't care. She was having a total meltdown in front of everyone. She pointed a shaking finger at Lyric, who was staring at the key in her hand with tears in her eyes. "She's nothing," Tiana screamed, her breath coming in short gasps. "She's just a baker. I'm the one who belongs here. I was the chosen one." The boss didn't move. He just watched Tiana with a cold, disappointed look. Tiana realized then that everyone was watching her act like a child. She looked at the faces of the guests, seeing their judgment and their surprise. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She hadn't just lost the gift. She had lost her dignity and her place in this world. She let out one last, broken sob before turning and running out of the hall, the sound of her crying fading into the night. Lyric stood still, holding the key tight, finally free from the weight that had been crushing her. The heavy envelope felt like a brick in Lyric's hand as she walked toward her landlord's office. For months, this building had felt like a cage, a place where she had to walk softly so the floorboards wouldn't cry out. But today, her footsteps were firm. She reached the door and handed over the rent money, every single cent she owed. There was no shaking in her fingers. As the landlord scribbled a receipt, Lyric felt a weight lift off her shoulders that she hadn't realized she was carrying. She was no longer a person who owed the world an apology for taking up space. Leaving the office, she saw Tiana leaning against the brick wall outside, scrolling through her phone. Tiana looked up, her face twisting into that familiar, fake smile that used to make Lyric feel small. "There you are," Tiana said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I have a great idea for the next video. I need you to write something fast, something really sad. People love it when you look broken." Lyric stopped. She looked at Tiana, really looked at her, and saw someone who only valued the shadows in others. "No," Lyric said. The word was small, but it felt like a mountain. Tiana laughed, a sharp, cold sound. "No, Lyric, you need me. Without my channel, you're just a girl in a quiet room. You can't do this alone." "I'm not alone," Lyric replied, her voice steady and clear. "I'm finally with myself again. I don't need a camera to tell me I exist, and I don't need you to tell me what to say. We're done. Tiana, don't call me." She walked away before Tiana could respond. The air outside felt different, crisp and full of possibility. She headed straight back to her small apartment. The hallway smelled of old wood and fried food, but inside her room, the late afternoon sun was hitting the keys of her piano, making them glow like white teeth. For a long time, the piano had been a graveyard of half-finished ideas and painful memories. She had treated it like a monster that might bite if she touched it. But now, she sat down on the bench. She didn't think about views or comments or what Tiana would think. She placed her hands on the keys. They felt cool and familiar. She pressed a single note, a low G that hummed through the wood and into her chest. Then another. Slowly, a melody began to grow. It wasn't a sad song for a screen. It was a song of reclamation. It was a sound that belonged only to her. The music started to flow, moving like water over smooth stones. Her fingers danced across the ivory, finding chords she thought she had forgotten. The room was no longer silent. The walls seemed to breathe with the rhythm. Lyric closed her eyes, letting the music wash away the months of noise and lies. She wasn't playing for the world. She was playing to find her way back home. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the melody soared, filling every corner of the room with a beautiful, reclaimed light. She didn't reach for her phone to record. If you like this video, like and subscribe for more. Tell me in the comments section what you think about this story. I am going to be dedicating my time always to feed you with a lot of beautiful stories, the channel you can trust, share with friends and families. Thank you.